This is the European edition of Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. We bring you the European unicorns, startups, founders, regulators, and leaders innovating the rapidly evolving fintech scene today. A truly localized podcast with both English and local language content, with some of the world's most well-known hosts and influencers in the fintech sector globally. Join us every week as we explore what makes the European Union a phenomenal proving ground for many of the fastest growing fintech players in the world today. Okay, let's roll.
Buongiorno a tutti, I am Paolo Sironi, your host of the Banker's Bookshelf. Every month I invite authors and researchers of the most interesting publications which found a prominent space in the library of curious bankers and fintech entrepreneurs. You know me as the host of the Banker's Bookshelf and the best-selling author of Banks and Fintech on Platform Economies. But I also have an international corporate role at IBM, Institute for Business Value, where I lead research and thought leadership in banking and financial markets. And this year, I had the opportunity to research on what I believe is the new battlefield for banks and fintech competition. That is the market for small and medium-sized enterprises. Why does that matter? It matters because SMEs are 90% of firms worldwide. A staggering number. They are 70% of workforce and contribute to 50% of the global GDP. While retail banking is more of a commodity these days, SME banking sits at the intersection between retail and corporate banking, but lacks the margins to serve more personally the customers and the competencies that can scale the relationship. And this is why technology has the opportunity to create real differentiation in SME banking. It can address excessive cost to serve in a way that banks can scale at convenient margins. And it can address the gap in traditional risk management operations in a way that banks can scale their operations with confidence in risk taking. So this is the reason why today's episode is dedicated to a conversation about the strategic content of my latest study, Banks for Small and Medium Enterprises, Serving the World Economy with Data and AI, that you can find on the ibm.com/IBV pages. Now, this research has been published in collaboration with BIAN, the Banking Industry Architecture Network, and it has been enriched by the extraordinary contribution of experts from the SME Finance Forum, managed by the IFC. The IFC Finance Corporation, the IFC in the International Finance Corporation, is a member of the World Bank Group. And today, we are hosting one of their executives, Khrystyna Kushnir, for a podcast conversation about this research and the fate of SME markets at the intersection between technology and new customer habits. Khrystyna, welcome to the Banker's Bookshelf.
Thank you so much, Paolo. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
Khrystyna, you're joining from Washington. Can you just tell us briefly what is your role at the IFC?
Thank you. I am the knowledge management and content lead for the SME Finance Forum, which is housed within the Financial Institutions Group in IFC.
So today is election day in the US when we are hearing this episode, but there's something more important that we need to discuss, which is the fate of small and medium enterprises. We just said that they are important for the world economy, and it's something that is relevant for the IFC as well in your role in terms of promoting economic development. Can you tell us a bit more about this, so the relevance of SME markets and the role of the IFC?
Thank you. So SME markets are important for banking and the world economy. And so the reasons why, first of all, for banking, there is a gap between supply and demand of finance for small businesses. And IFC estimates that this gap is currently at about 5.7 trillion for formal SMEs in emerging markets and developing economies. This gap is even higher if we add informal SMEs. A lot of small businesses are informal, and the gap would increase by another 2.1 trillion. So this opportunity is there for banks. To put it in perspective, this accounts for 19% of GDP and 20% of overall private sector credit provided to banks in these economies.
So how do you find the formal and informal for our audience?
So the definitions vary by country, but and often informal would mean that the company is not registered formally, and but they still operate.
Which is actually a big pocket for financial inclusion as well.
Yes.
Okay, so let's say this is a relevant part of the economy. You estimated that there is a gap. That means that there's need for funding that doesn't find basically a response. So that means there is a market. There is a huge demand that banks can look at. Now, banks, of course, also need to be prudent in their risk management processes, but overall, this might be an untapped opportunity because of a series of constraints that might not allow banks to do as much as they could or as much as the clients desire. But I think it's not just, if I understand well your analysis and research, it's not just finance that SMEs need, that there's more than that. So how do you see basically the non-financial needs of SMEs? What are they?
Yes, thank you. So, and here I would like to also cite another IFC research where essentially the enterprise surveys, World Bank enterprise surveys, found that over 52% of firms that they surveyed do not apply for loans because they have sufficient credit. So essentially what it means, what it could mean, right, that there are not enough economic opportunities for them to grow, and that's why they do not require additional credit. And here, one of the interpretations is that SMEs, in addition to finance, they need access to markets, access to skills, as well as adequate regulatory enabling environment.
Okay, so that it means there is a portfolio of needs that SMEs, if you like, are expressing directly or indirectly. The question becomes, how can banks in their role close this gap and help them accessing financial services, but also finding opportunities to grow that in the end will demand for more services. So it's a win-win. And banks are effectively at the intersection of a big transformation of their operations because they're not only operating directly in terms of managing the relationship through a branch, through an advisor, but also embedded themselves into ecosystems, and SMEs are large ecosystems. So it will be interesting to discover going forward how banks are effectively getting through that transformation and which are the, if you like, consequences, what is the positive impact that they have on the SME ecosystem overall. And that's the reason why in this research that we did together, Khrystyna, and I thank you again for your expert contribution and the one of your colleagues, we wanted to understand more about the gap between what the SME want in terms of finance and financial services and what the bankers understand the SME needs, because if we don't understand clients, we cannot serve clients, right? We will not direct investment in technology to the right opportunities. So I think that this is a very important aspect that can be found in these banks for small and medium enterprises. So we interviewed in this research through 2 global surveys, more than 1,200 owners of small and medium enterprises and almost 700 bankers with responsibility in business banking, and we compared the opinions. So I want to go through this with you, try to figure out, what is the difference and how can the gap be resolved with transformation of business models and technology. Shall we do this?
Yes, Paolo, thank you.
So there are 4 key questions we can find into this report, and I start with the first one, which is here represented. So basically, we asked the SMEs how they imagine their primary banking relationship. So which are the key factors that would incline them to recognize a bank or a fintech as the owner of the primary relationship? And we asked the same question to the bankers. Now, what the bankers told us is that they believe the SMEs ask simple things. They want to have proximity with a branch. They want to have access to an easy-to-use app, and they want to talk to basically somebody that favors their networking. What did instead the SME say about the key factors to identify the primary banking relationship?
Yes. So actually, what we found in this research is that SME expect bankers to understand their unique business needs, offer tailored solutions, and facilitate networking with business partners and clients.
Okay, so in essence, what we're saying is that the way SME imagine the bank is not just a provider of services, but it's an entity which is part of their business ecosystem. So it's recognized to be part of that ecosystem for networking, and therefore has the right expertise to understand their needs and to create a detailed solution. So it's not necessarily just access, availability, but it's the connectivity within the ecosystem. It's like a localization within the community, if I can say that.
Yes. And I think another interesting finding was that actually there were some differences among countries that we looked at. And so, for example, SMEs in the US, UK, France, and China reported branch proximity as one of the top 3 preferences. And really that spurs from the fact that many bank branches in major advanced economies have been closed due to digital advancements and probably as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, I think that the consumers and customers didn't adapt as quickly. And I think what we see is that in some countries, SMEs need a bit of a hybrid approach to manage this change and transition. But conversely, in India, SMEs rely a lot on easy-to-use mobile apps. And that was really the result of government-led intervention to accelerate digital adoption throughout the society. So I think that here, when bankers read our research, I think they will find a lot of interesting information about variation among countries.
I actually found that discovery interesting myself as we made it. And you said a couple of things that are relevant, and I want to leverage them. First of all, you spoke about India. This research is also enriched by 10 very interesting interviews with executives of institutions worldwide, people like Maximiliano Damian, who is the head of SME business at Nubank, the largest neobank out of Asia Pacific, 100 million customers. But also C.S. Sethi, the current chairman of State Bank of India. SBI is the largest bank in India with 500 million customers. So it was interesting to learn from these executives the perspective they shaped for their banking operations in different markets and bring it all together in terms of providing key commentaries through this research. And then the second thing you spoke about is the branch proximity. Just a couple of episodes ago, we hosted Brett King for his new edition of his bestseller, Branch Today, Gone Tomorrow, and also had the opportunity to contribute to his new book myself, which is about to be published. And when we researched on the fate of branch network, we saw that since the 3rd century, more than 90% of the branches were closed in the UK. So it's no surprise that in places like the UK, SMEs also lament the difficulty of accessing a relationship with somebody in a branch as they're not necessarily available. And in the last 12 years, in Italy and in Germany, more than 30% of branches were also closed due to consolidation. And that's the reason why we also wanted to learn from the SMEs which are the banking solutions that they believe are more relevant for their growth opportunity within their business domain, within their ecosystem. And we ask also the bankers what they believe is relevant for the SMEs. And here is what the banker said. The banker said that SME need guidance for credit scoring. They need flexible funding options and due diligence support when it comes to choosing for example, a partner or somebody they need to deal with, as bankers might know more about the, if you like, a credit worthiness of institutions and players out there. But let's learn together from you, Khrystyna, what the SMEs instead said is very relevant for them in terms of the banking services that will help them to grow their business.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Paolo. It was quite surprising for me to see that there was such divergence on this question between bankers and SMEs. So what we learned from the survey is that when it comes to banking services that can facilitate growth, SME owners and managers emphasize the importance of expert support in planning their expansion, as well as solid market and economic analysis. So it's very interesting that SMEs expect these non-financial services from the bankers.
So I guess that the SMEs are thinking about their business problem. That's the key point, right? So they need to make sure that every decision is made in the context of the business problem, and they look for expertise, and they believe that the bankers might have this expertise, especially today that markets are becoming everywhere, locally and globally, way more uncertain, given the periods of stress that we all experience, not to mention the pandemic. And statistically, this need for financial support is very, very large. So that seems to be a very important element for engagement. And of course, that cannot be done without supporting the bankers with technology in a way that they can run at convenient prices, that conversation. And there's another element that we discovered. I just said that the bankers looked for flexible funding options, and the SME instead say fast access to funds as a preference. Now, one of the things that we learned from the executives that we talked to while doing research is that simplicity pays out. So, for example, they realized that personalization is not a matter of a variety of different contractual clauses that are available to the SMEs to choose from, because that might scare them. They don't have time to go through so much and so many differences. Personalization instead is about being relevant within the time, the cycle, and the situation of their ecosystem, which is the reason why also embedding inside those ecosystem plays is very important and might be recognized by the SMEs as a great opportunity to deal with. And so I think this is really, really, really interesting. And so start spelling the need for beyond pure banking services like lending and payment as an opportunity to engage. And we were not just content, Khrystyna, to discuss what is important for them in terms of business growth. We also wanted to learn how do they think the banking services can help them to become more productive and more efficient. Now, two big needs are out there in the SME markets. One is, of course, access to funding, and the other one is also becoming more productive in a world that is very demanding. And SMEs can be helped by banks to become more productive. But let's see what the SME said, but also what the bankers believe is relevant for the SMEs. Now, all of these differences are important because where banks and fintech create solutions with technology, they need to strike the right chord. So it's the focus at the right definition of value that can be more successful. That's why understanding this white space is super important. So we said the banking services and solutions that help SMEs to become more efficient. Here is what the banker said. The banker said that SMEs would favor instant payment for all operating expenses and analysis and forecast of all of the operating expenses, basically to project their future cash flow needs, and the possibility to aggregate in a single view all of their bank accounts. But let's learn from you, Khrystyna, what the SMEs said instead.
Thank you, Paolo. So in this question, actually, there was SMEs and bankers agree on 2/3.
Actually,
yes,
2/3
of kind of what can increase SME efficiency in operating. So and specifically, instant payments for all operating expenses is number one priority, also for SMEs, and as bankers highlighted it. And analysis and forecast of all operating expenses is number 3 in the list of priorities for SMEs, as well as for bankers. But there is one interesting answer, which is that SMEs look for super apps across all banking and non-banking needs. And so that is one of the top 3 priorities for SMEs. So that I think that is something that would be one of the key takeaways from this research for bankers. And what also we learned that sort of access to these comprehensive super apps appeals to SMEs not only in emerging markets, but also across the EU countries. And these centralized platforms, they help create that ecosystem that, Paolo, you have talked before about. And it has a wealth of benefits in terms of aggregating data, analyzing data on payments, and data tracking other decision-making factors. And then that data can be used for forecasting.
So let me say something about this, and I think you're really pointing to something relevant. We said that both bankers and SMEs recognize instant payments as an opportunity to make, if you like, their operations more fluid, so to have control about their cash flow, and also the need to be supported in terms of cash flow projection. That's where banks can use artificial intelligence or machine learning in order to basically provide them with a contextualized perspective or their needs vis-a-vis the market conditions. But then we saw this huge gap. Like the bankers said, SMEs might love to see their bank accounts all in one place. So basically they look at, the whole picture. And SMEs did not consider that. Bankers said, super apps are not important, but SMEs said, super apps are very important. Now, the aggregation of bank accounts, which is like entry point open banking, is part of a super app. But what SMEs are saying is, so what? So basically, I just don't need to know about my finances. I need to put them in the context of how I work within my ecosystem, because that is what basically generates value for them. So all of those institutions which are learning how to embed themselves into ecosystems, or they are orchestrating ecosystems with apps that span banking and non-banking relationships, might have a very strong opportunity to become leaders in the SME market, which is still a very complex market to serve, given the cost to serve and given the variety of the players which are operating there. And then I also learned something else in this with this question, because Khrystyna, you remember that we also asked if the collection of delinquent receivables is important for the efficiency of their operations or not. And overall, SMEs seems not to be so much interested, as well as the bankers. But there is one market where this became more relevant, reached one of the top 3 positions, which is the US. And the reason is because almost 20% of the payments by US SMEs are still done with checks. And that's amazing because such a mature market. So the question in markets like the US is how can checks still be replaced by different type of payments? We also had the CEO of NACHA that takes care of payment methods in the US contributing to our research, Jane Larimer. So I invite everybody to read because there are nuances and differences across regions that we also tried to represent in this research so that people can better localize the insights into their own market of reference. And then, Khrystyna, we had last questions for the SMEs and the bankers. Clearly, SMEs needs to make their job in risk environments. Their entrepreneurs' risk, I guess, is what they eat every day. But they might want to do that in a way that risk is under control. So we asked the SMEs, where do they believe a financial institution or a fintech can help them addressing risk and compliance or security better? And of course, we asked the bankers the same opinion. And we really find another gap. So what the bankers said that they believe the SME want in terms of support for risk, compliance, and security is fraud monitoring of all transactions. We know that a lot of SMEs are also becoming more and more online. So bankers believe that's important. And then number two, they said insurance for a foreseen event. And number three is hedging on financial risks. So I would say like the base of the security process, fraud monitoring for the transactions, and access to financial products, financial contracts to hedge insurance or financial risk like interest rate, inflation. But let me learn from you, Khrystyna, and so our audience, what the SMEs instead said is important for them as a priority.
Thank you, Paolo. So fraud monitoring of transactions was also one of the top 3 priorities for SMEs. And I think with a sort of use of AI to create various sort of opportunities for fraudsters is increasing. And I think fraud is getting a bit harder to detect right now. So I think that that's area of concern both for bankers and SMEs, and it's one of the top 3. SMEs also look for support in navigating the complexities of compliance obligations and making more informed decisions about sustainability, because right now all the reporting requirements for sustainability will trickle down to SMEs, and those requirements need to be harmonized, and there has to be a system in place that would allow SMEs to report in an efficient manner, because SMEs do not have a lot of time to dedicate to reporting and compliance issues, because they focus on their main business.
So to me, it's like the SMEs are saying, before I can even consider a financial instrument that might help me to basically manage the volatility of the interest rates, the level of inflation, or the FX risk, if they are into the import-export business, I need to reduce red tape. There's so much that I have to do, like, for example, applying for a sustainable funding opportunity is not so straightforward because there's a lot that has to be done. So they really need some help to make sure that this can be done with no time, in essence, so that I believe banks can also start positioning the core of their business, which is solutions for the risk management of the financial risks of the SMEs. So every dollar invested from banks to simplify those processes and support the compliance of SMEs is a dollar that can resonate in terms of growing the business for more traditional financial contracts. And here we saw some differences again around the world. Like in the US, SMEs seem to be, for example, more inclined to consider hedging of financial risk and insurance contracts more relevant compared to other constituencies. I guess that has got to do also with the financial education of SMEs, SME owners in different markets. Another case, credit scoring was not so relevant for the SMEs overall, but was more important for the US SMEs because they may recognize already that that is essential in their banking relationship. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, today is November the 4th, when we launched the episode. That is the election day in the US. No political statement, but I heard both candidates to the White House talking about the importance of SME markets. So I hope that the politicians can also basically look at how they can reduce red tape for SMEs to help them grow. So now, Khrystyna, this is a very interesting research. We just touched upon some of the key insights that can be found by reading Banking for Small and Medium Enterprises, Serving the World Economy with Data and AI. I invite everyone to download this report from the pages of IBM Institute for Business Value, ibm.com/IBV. This paper was launched at the SME Finance Forum, which is the annual event of the SME FF that was hosted in Sao Paulo, Brazil, last September. Khrystyna, can you tell us a bit more about the role of the SME Finance Forum in SME markets worldwide?
Thank you, Paolo. So the SME Finance Forum was created by the G20 Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion, and it is managed by the International Finance Corporation. The forum is a global network of over 240 banks, fintech companies, development finance institutions, credit guarantee agencies who work to expand access to finance for small businesses. The forum provides services to its members in 3 streams, which for mnemonic purposes we call Learn, Link, and Lead, where we encourage members to learn from each other, share best practices, link to new business opportunities, and lead the voice of the private sector in high-level public policy discussions. Our member survey shows that over 2/3 of respondents acquired new knowledge about SME banking that was directly relevant to their work. 40% adopted new practices, and 36% made new business partnerships. And around 10% received new investment that began with their participation in the SME Finance Forum activities.
So, Khrystyna, on the knowledge side, I believe that we contributed with this research to elevate the knowledge of all the participants. And as I attended, I have to say, I learned a lot from all of the participants as well. So I do recommend anyone that is in financial services around SME markets to attend the next year SME Finance Forum. Is really worth. So having said that, I thank you for the conversation we had today around the content of this IBM research, Banking for Small and Medium Enterprises. I invite everyone in our audience to stay tuned for more, as more episodes and research discussions are coming. I believe it is clear by now that the Banker's Bookshelf is an incredible opportunity to learn from recognized authors, researchers, and executives like Khrystyna Kushnir. Their research and work has found a prominent space in the library of curious bankers and fintech entrepreneurs, and it is available to you now. Arrivederci, and enjoy the Banker's Bookshelf jingle.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Banks Europe, a Provoke Media podcast in cooperation with FinTech Stage. Don't forget to tweet us out, shout out, or post to the team at Breaking Banks EU on Twitter. If there's something or someone you'd like to hear on our cast, let us know. See you next week on Breaking Banks Europe.